Welcome to a delicious stroll through time, where we uncover the lost Sunday supper dishes that once brought families together around the kitchen table. Join us as we dive into forgotten recipes, filled with classic flavors, nostalgic ingredients, and a dash of vintage charm. From heartwarming casseroles to creative twists on everyday favorites, these meals paint a picture of an era when cooking meant family bonding and proud home-cooked comfort. Number 1. Veal birds. Once seen in 1930s home magazines, veal birds involved thin veal cutlets rolled around breadcrumbs, onions, and sometimes a hint of sage, then secured with toothpicks. Post-war households eager to impress guests would prepare them on Sundays, especially in baby boomer families who had begun to afford more diverse cuts of meat. By the 1970s, veal fell out of favor due to cost and ethical concerns, causing this dish to fade from mainstream dinner tables. Gen X diners rarely sought veal birds, preferring faster, easier meals that required fewer steps and utensils. Old cookbooks still champion the dish as a delicate treat, once symbolic of upward mobility. Number 2. Porcupine Meatballs. A quirky invention of mid-century America, these meatballs combined ground beef and uncooked rice that would stick out like porcupine quills once cooked. Popular in the 1940s and 1950s, they were smothered in a tomato sauce and slow-baked, making them an affordable Sunday main for large families. Some housewives might add a splash of Worcestershire sauce for depth, while others tossed in diced peppers for color. Gradually, the novelty waned as cooks found it easier to serve regular meatballs or faster casserole recipes. Today, porcupine meatballs mostly appear in old recipe boxes or community cookbooks, seldom gracing modern supper tables unless someone feels nostalgic for those cozy, thrifty dinners of the baby boomer era. Number 3. Swiss steak. Despite its name, it's a distinctly American classic that took off in the 1940s and 1950s. It involved tenderizing cheaper cuts of beef, often round steak, by pounding them with flour, then simmering in a gravy of tomatoes, onions, and sometimes celery. Homemakers in the 1960s commonly featured Swiss steak at Sunday gatherings, leaning on brand-sponsored cooking pamphlets for tips on how to make the meat fork tender. Baby boomers might recall the tangy, sweet flavor lingering at family dinners. But as the decades wore on, improved cuts of beef and simpler methods won out. The extra prep time and sometimes heavy sauce contributed to Swiss steak slowly disappearing, leaving it as a faint memory in the realm of old America nostalgia. Number 4. Chicken fricassee. This braised chicken dish, often cooked with carrots, onions, and a creamy roux, once exemplified cozy Sunday suppers throughout 20th century America. Advertisements in the 1930s and 1940s touted fricassee as a comforting, one-pot solution to feed a growing family, while baby boomers relished its thick gravy poured over mashed potatoes or biscuits. Over time, simpler roast or fried chicken options overshadowed the fricassee method, which required careful simmering and constant stirring. By the 1970s, convenience took center stage, making this once popular staple increasingly rare. Modern cooks who attempt it typically do so only if they're reviving family recipes or exploring vintage culinary trends, ensuring chicken fricassee remains a largely forgotten treasure. Number 5. Lobster Newberg. Considered high society fare in old Hollywood films, this dish combined fresh lobster pieces with a rich cream and sherry sauce. It thrived in the 1940s and 1950s, especially on special occasion Sundays when families aspired to restaurant-level elegance at home. Baby boomers grew up hearing about it in aspirational commercials that promised fine dining in one's own kitchen. Yet as lobster became pricier and as lighter, simpler seafood preparations took hold, Lobster Newberg lost popularity. Gen X turned to grilled or broiled lobster tails instead, and the heavy cream base felt dated. Today, it exists mostly in historical references and specialized restaurants that cater to those curious about mid-century gourmet tastes. Number 6. Baked Country Captain Chicken. Tracing its roots to a curried stew that traveled from India to the American South, Country Captain Chicken rose to fame in the 1950s. This version, often baked instead of simply stewed, combined chicken, tomatoes, curry powder, and sometimes raisins or almonds. It appeared in vintage recipe cards as an exotic Sunday option for families seeking something beyond the standard roast. Advertisements boasted how the aromatic spices elevated humble chicken into a stylish meal. Nevertheless, as more authentic international cuisines became accessible, Country Captain's mild, Americanized flavors lost their intrigue. By the 1970s, families gravitated toward fresher stir-fries or direct global influences, making the dish an infrequent guest on modern supper tables. Number 7. Lamb Curry Casserole. Similar to Country Captain, lamb curry casseroles emerged in the 1960s as a nod to the growing curiosity about Eastern flavors. Typically, leftover lamb would be slow-cooked with onions, mild curry, and an apple-based sauce that toned down any gamey aftertaste. Served over rice, it offered a comforting meal reminiscent of something borderline foreign for small-town America. Baby boomers recall seeing it occasionally at potlucks or Sunday gatherings, where it stood out for its bright flavors. However, as restaurants began offering more traditional Indian cuisine, this hybrid approach felt outdated. Over time, modern cooks seeking authentic curry dishes passed on the mild casserole form, and it soon became another footnote in community cookbooks. Number 8. Mock turtle soup. Popular in certain regions from the late 19th century through mid-century, this concoction used organ meats, often calf's head or ground beef, to replicate the flavor of real turtle soup. It achieved notoriety in old commercials that championed its thriftiness and novelty, especially during the 1930s and 1940s. Families served it on Sundays to highlight a unique dish that seemed fancy, but was actually quite economical. By the 1950s, baby boomers were less enthusiastic about consuming something with mock in its name, and organ meats gradually fell from favor. As modern grocery selections improved and genuine turtle meat became controversial, mock turtle soup slipped into obscurity. Known today more as a historical curiosity than a practical meal. Number 9. Deviled crab casserole. A staple in coastal communities during the golden age of American diner culture, deviled crab typically included fresh or canned crab, mixed with breadcrumbs, peppers, and a mustard or Worcestershire-based sauce. Housewives in the 1940s might have touted it as a luxurious Sunday dish that mimicked restaurant specialties at a fraction of the price. By the 1960s, the baby boomer generation still enjoyed it for special occasions, often presenting it in individual ramekins. However, as international shellfish trade expanded and people got used to simpler crab cakes or direct crab legs, the deviled version felt too heavy on filler. Gen X found the notion a bit quaint, leading the recipe to quietly vanish from common family suppers in favor of less complicated seafood preparations. Number 10. Corned beef hash bake. During the 1930s and 1940s, corned beef hash proved a thrifty way to transform leftover corned beef into a savory meal by mixing it with diced potatoes, onions, and peppers. Some families baked it in the oven with cheese or crackers for a Sunday supper that stretched the grocery budget. By the baby boomer years, it remained a reliable option, supported by commercials promoting canned corned beef as a shortcut. Over time, though, fresh beef options and concerns over sodium levels led many households away from canned products. Gen X watchers, raised on quicker meals, didn't find a baked hash all that appealing. Consequently, corned beef hash bake nearly disappeared, replaced by simpler stovetop versions or entirely different dinner choices. Number 11, baked beans with salt pork. A time-honored tradition in parts of New England, this dish was often slow-cooked on Saturdays and then reheated for Sunday suppers. While baked beans endured in certain pockets of American cuisine, the old-fashioned version with thick slabs of salt pork lost ground by the 1960s, especially outside of New England. Baby boomers across the rest of the country found easier bean variations in cans, and the extended oven time seemed impractical. Advertisements for speedy cooking solutions nudged home cooks toward processed sauces or quick stovetop methods. Though some dedicated enthusiasts still carry on the slow-baked tradition, most modern families rarely opt for salt pork, leading to a vanished Sunday ritual that conjures images of old America's communal dinners. Number 12. Meatloaf Surprise. Different from the traditional meatloaf, surprise versions often hid a boiled egg, cheese cube, or vegetable filling inside. Mid-century cookbooks championed it as a fun Sunday meal for families seeking something playful, particularly in the 1940s and 1950s. Kids enjoyed slicing into the loaf to discover the secret center, which gave it a reputation for whimsy. Brand-sponsored pamphlets even suggested using colored toothpicks or sauce designs to further spark excitement. However, by the 1970s, these gimmicks felt passé, and more direct, streamlined meatloaf recipes stole the limelight. Generation X found the stuffed approach cumbersome, and these days, surprise meatloaf is scarcely mentioned, overshadowed by more modern variations with global spices or healthier meat blends. Number 13. Shepherd's Pie with lamb leftovers. While shepherd's pie remains known, many modern cooks substitute ground beef for lamb. The original version, especially popular in 1940s America among communities with British roots, was a Sunday strategy to use up leftover roasted lamb. Baby boomers born to families steeped in old-world traditions might recall the distinctive tang that lamb imparts, combined with gravy, carrots, and mashed potato topping. But as ground beef grew more affordable and widespread, real lamb-based shepherd's pie became rare. Younger generations also found lamb's flavor a bit polarizing, contributing to the disappearance of authentic Sunday leftover lamb pie. Nowadays, mainstream references typically involve beef or turkey, leaving the true lamb version a relic of vintage comfort cooking. Number 14. Salsbury steak with onion gravy. A mainstay of mid-20th century diners and home kitchens, Salsbury steak was essentially seasoned ground beef shaped into patties, smothered in onion gravy. Pioneered in the early 1900s, it peaked in popularity during the 1940s and 1950s, thanks to brand promotions emphasizing a steak dinner at half the cost. Baby boomers remember it on Sunday nights, paired with mashed potatoes or basic vegetables. As time passed, frozen TV dinner versions overshadowed homemade recipes, and the dish became associated with cheap microwave trays rather than a comforting, freshly prepared meal. By the 1970s and beyond, few families chose Salisbury steak for Sunday supper, so it disappeared from the collective weekly rotation. Number 15, codfish balls. This once thriving staple, especially in coastal New England communities, featured shredded salted cod mixed with mashed potatoes, then shaped into balls and fried or baked. Their heyday stretched from the 1930s into the 1950s, promoted in old commercials as a protein-packed Sunday choice for families trying to stretch their budgets. Baby boomers might have encountered them at church socials, where they were served with tartar sauce or ketchup. As fresh fish supplies improved and as tastes shifted away from salted cod, these humble balls started falling out of favor. Fried alternatives like fish sticks gained commercial success in the 1960s, edging codfish balls into near obscurity among modern home cooks looking for less labor-intensive recipes. Number 16, salmon patties with white sauce. Often using canned salmon due to its practicality, these patties mixed flaked fish with breadcrumbs, egg, and seasonings, then pan-fried until crispy. Some families top them with a creamy white sauce or occasionally a mushroom gravy for Sunday dinner. Baby boomers recall that the familiar shape and mild flavor made them more appealing to picky eaters. By the 1970s, though, fresh seafood was increasingly available and the reliance on canned salmon diminished. The white sauce topping also felt old-fashioned as people embraced lighter condiments. Over time, salmon patties slid from the average Sunday repertoire, replaced by grilled fresh fillets or more polished recipes that used modern flavor profiles. Number 17, dumplings with leftover roast. Many mid-century families saved leftover pot roast or pork roast to transform into a stew topped with homemade dumplings. This method stretched the original meal for another day, usually Sunday when extended family might gather. Baby boomers recall how the dumplings would puff up in the savory broth, providing a hearty winter treat. By the 1960s, convenience foods, canned biscuits, and pre-mixed dough overshadowed scratch-made dumplings, and the tradition gradually wore thin. Gen X found quicker recipes, and the dumpling-laden approach seemed overly heavy. Though still cherished in some tight-knit communities, it's no longer a widespread Sunday supper option, relegated to nostalgia for cozy, time-intensive cooking. Number 18. Chicken fried steak. A hallmark of Southern-style diners, chicken fried steak once symbolized generous Sunday fare, especially in the 1950s. Pounded beef cutlets battered and fried, then smothered with creamy gravy, gave families the taste of fried chicken using a cheaper protein source. Baby boomers across various regions recall either loving its crunchy exterior or disliking the sometimes chewy meat. Over time, concerns about frying and saturated fats contributed to its decline. Additionally, restaurants that served it in mass quantities turned it into a low-end menu item, diminishing its home-cooked appeal. By the 1980s, health-conscious trends further pushed chicken fried steak out of the weekly Sunday lineup, leaving it primarily in niche diner settings or comfort food showcases. Number 19. Old-fashioned soda bread. While soda bread remains a proud tradition in Irish communities, the specifically American mid-century take on it, loaded with raisins, sugar, and sometimes caraway seeds, made occasional appearances for a special Sunday treat. Advertisements in the 1930s highlighted it as a simple, no-yeast loaf any homemaker could whip up. Baby boomers grew up associating it with holiday dinners or family reunions, particularly among those with Irish heritage. However, as artisan bread baking gained traction in the 1970s and 1980s, soda bread began to appear too plain in comparison to crusty sourdoughs and multi-grain loaves. Gen X and beyond generally overlooked this sweet-laced variant, keeping it mostly for St. Patrick's Day rather than a weekly Sunday meal, effectively rendering it forgotten. Number 20. Chicken croquettes. During the 1940s and 1950s, families regarded croquettes as an elegant way to reuse leftover chicken. Finely chopped meat mixed with a thick white sauce or mashed potatoes, then breaded and deep-fried, gave Sunday tables a crisp, golden treat, reminiscent of restaurant appetizers. Baby boomers remember them at gatherings where they were topped with gravy or served alongside vegetables. But as nutritional advice shifted away from frying, and as cooks gained access to simpler meal solutions, croquettes lost appeal. Their intricate preparation, shaping, chilling, breading, and frying, felt laborious by the 1970s, when convenience reigned. Now, outside of specialized retro diners or certain nostalgic communities, chicken croquettes barely register as an everyday cooking option, making them yet another vanished staple of mid-century Sunday suppers.